So first off, thanks all for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So this has been a long time coming, and I think most of you are pretty excited about where we're going on this, and hopefully all of you are excited about where we're going. So as you've probably seen and heard a lot in the last few years, us chatting and talking about cloud and changing the conversation with our customers. We're going through a major transformation in our business, and the opportunity is significant, right? So, I remember, and I'm sure many of you too do as well, as being industry, being in the industry a long time. When we first started commercial services, it was all greenfield opportunity, and it was like, we were walking through getting this new business, and everybody was excited, and there was a great deal of passion around it and other things. We kind of took another step in that when we went with the carrier, when we started serving cell towers, and we started seeing cell towers come on, and we were doing 2,000-3,000 cell towers, and just a ton of growth in that business. And that was probably the 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe. We're also seeing this incredible growth in the channel, which we just talked about in the summit last week, and so that's pretty exciting. But I got to tell you, out of all those things in the last 20 years that we've seen, this new service and the way that we're changing the conversation and moving up market with cloud is probably one of the biggest opportunities we have. Just when you think about, not only what it represents in our footprint, but outside of our footprint, it's significant. And so the market opportunity is huge. And other things happening, this is more important than ever, especially natural disasters and disaster recovery. We'll jump into some of the products here in a second, but very exciting, and we're really excited to kind of launch this to the group, and also enable our referral partners, referral agents, to kind of start helping us build this business as well. So I did just want to introduce Bob Buchanan. So for those of you who don't know, Bob is been in the industry a really long time. He's a phenomenal guy, and he was one of the original founders and has been over at RapidScale for a long time, and just brings a wealth of information and knowledge, not only about cloud, but to channel in general. And so I was really excited when he said that he would be willing to come in and tee this up with you all, because I just feel like he's the perfect guy to talk to you about this on multiple fronts. So Bob, I hope I didn't oversell you. Just kidding. he's but he's a great guy, and appreciate you jumping in and helping us start this ride and journey together, Bob.
I appreciate that, Jared. And probably have, my assumption would be there's probably a delineation of knowledge where some folks that are joining us today maybe know a little bit more than others. My intent here is not to bore anybody. I think if you when we get done here today, and if you come away with a better understanding, where you feel like you might be able to communicate with these folks out in the field with a little bit more depth and knowledge, that's a win. This is a journey. I think that's why the title is Cloud 101, right? I consider this kind of an introduction, elementary type stuff. And I wouldn't expect anybody to say, hey, I can go help sell all this after we talk today. I think that's probably a fair statement. That being said, it'll be pretty straightforward. I don't like to just ramble on. So if you guys are like, hey, Bob, I have a question, just interrupt me, or stick your hand up there on the Teams chat, and we'll jump in. I won't have every answer guaranteed. As Jared mentioned, I have been in the industry for some time. I cut my teeth in the data center business in 2003. Prior to that, was in other areas of technology sales. But so I've seen a lot that's happened. It's changed tremendously. And really what's changed is not only the technology changing, but customer buying behavior changing. And I think that's an excellent opportunity for where RapidScale sits today. So I'm not sure where you want to take it from here, Jared. We can just dive right in, or we can, a good suggestion might be to field a couple questions from the folks on the call, and just say, hey, if they got one thing out of this session today, what would it be?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say, I think many of you have taken the TLA, if I'm not mistaken. Can you guys
That'll
just
be
chime in and
Yeah.
say, or maybe just raise
Every
your...
one of them has, Jared. Every
Okay,
one.
That'll be
that's
that's
way
helpful.
better then. Okay,
That's
very good.
helpful.
That's
Yeah.
excellent news. I thought I had
Yeah.
heard that, so that's even better because that'll make this a lot easier to talk through.
Cool. Jared, do you want to drive the slides? Do you want me to drive? How do you want to do it?
Yeah, unless Don, do you have them open? I can drive them.
I do have them open, so just let me know when you want me to switch
Okay.
to a different one.
Great. So
Yeah,
can
we
you go ahead and share?
Yeah. Death by PowerPoint, Cloud Edition.
Perfect. Thanks, Don.
Okay.
All right. Pretty self-explanatory. There you go. I think everyone obviously knows the story here, and we know the Cox business story. I think if I was going to share with you anything, as you're talking to folks in the field from a RapidScale standpoint, two things. RapidScale has been in business for over a decade, and while we're relatively small business, there's a lot of experience here. If you really look across the management team, as well as not just the executive layer, but down to the more tactical and middle management layer, tons of experience on this team, and some folks that really understand what they're doing. So this just isn't our first rodeo, and that should deliver confidence. The second thing that I would say, Don, I think the screen's dynamic. So if you go ahead and keep clicking, there you go. What the other thing I would say is why was this marriage? Probably why did it make sense? Probably a couple reasons, but the one that I always fall back on is, while Cox has approximately 400,000 customers, and certainly not every customer is a perfect RapidScale customer. It would be fair to say that there's a lot of them. There's somewhere between 60 and 70,000 customers that sit in either that upper SMB or mid-market client that really fits the same type of a profile. And we'll dive into that in just a moment. Okay. So this says ideal customer, 25 to 4,000 users. That's a spectrum, and while it is accurate, I like to narrow it and just be more precise. We have customers that actually have more than 4,000 users, and certainly we have a few that are less than 25. If you do get below less than 25, what really happens is there's usually a trigger where you don't have anybody on site that understands anything about IT, and we risk getting into the danger zone. 4,000 users, you start probably getting into more. The other challenge happens. You get into more mature IT departments, and maybe our value proposition could get a little bit watered down. I like to think of that 50 to 500 type customer. And I think in terms of like brick and mortar clients, I think in terms of like a mortgage company, micro verticals, for example, finance is too broad. Credit unions, community banks in the finance sector, mortgage lenders, we do really well there. Do excellent in areas in the healthcare space. Again, probably not calling on the largest hospitals, while we have a few in that category. I think more like eye centers and multi-location, like specialty practices, right? Multi-location, limited IT resources, and those type of user counts are really good indicators. Those type of companies typically struggle with managing IT. And the reason being is twofold. One, it's a very competitive work environment to attract talent. And two, in that segment, that 50 to 500, now more than ever, those companies have an appetite to consume technology as the business dictates, meaning on demand via cloud. And to be able to do that, they're often kind of looking at an MSP and maybe displacing the MSP that have been supporting them. So those are just really common denominators. And then you can see some of those discovery questions. I'm not going to read every one of these for you. I think they should make sense. The ones I really like, though, I really don't like that question around, it's very rarely successful. What is your cloud strategy? I mean, you might get someone to chat, but a business type question around what are the IT initiatives that are on the roadmap for the next 6, 12, 18 months, and what are those triggers? Those are that's a little bit more of a long-term horizon, but that's where the bigger opportunities might present themselves. I'll just pause and say, hey, is there any comments or questions on this slide? Awesome. We can move on. Somebody's got to challenge me. I can't do this for an hour. So I'm expecting some questions. So where's the core disciplines, right? I mean, if you guys did the TLA, you're certainly familiar with desktop, the infrastructure as a service, and certainly probably the Microsoft practice. These are absolutely the core services. Desktop as a service is a little bit more niche than, if you look at the broader macro, cloud marketplace and who might be our cohorts. There's only a select few folks that do this really, really well. I hear all the time, and I hear that certainly in the from CB sellers, not anyone on this call, but on the direct side, they might say something like, well, no one really knows RapidScale, and outside the channel, that's absolutely a true statement. In the channel, we're pretty well branded, but folks in the channel probably think of us most for desktop. And then, the analyst community would think of us most for desktop. And Gartner, we're not inside a magic quadrant with Gartner. There is no desktop magic quadrant, but they do actually acknowledge the leaders in the space and the folks who are relevant, and we are tracked and acknowledged in their collateral as one of the leaders to keep an eye on. Infrastructure as a service. The great thing about all these services is there's a lot of drag. So if you sell one, it's very unusual. You just sell one point solution. You're going to get a lot of these complement each other. If you sell desktop, for example, you're going to sell infrastructure. Disaster recovery, security, identity is kind of like security, and certainly backup is different than DR. And then probably a big topic on everyone's mind is SD-WAN, right? We can move on. There was yeah, absolutely.
I have a question. Can you back up one?
Absolutely.
When we're looking at this, and you may get into this later, but since the sales reps are out there doing this and sending in leads, what of these would you say you've seen the most has come out of the CB sales teams?
That's a great question. It's SD-WAN, and it's probably Microsoft. We grew the SD-WAN practice like 130% year over year, and Microsoft was about 80% year over year. We're selling more SD-WAN out of the CB direct teams than we are in the channel. That's a big emphasis for us this coming year, is to sell more via the channel. That's a very competitive environment, as you know, Phyllis. Mm-hmm. But we got a really good story around VeloCloud. So, just going out and saying, hey, we're a Me Too story is probably not, it's definitely not good enough. Again, right. SD-WAN tends to complement what we're doing holistically, and we'll dive into that a little bit more as we expand into the different offerings. But yeah, those two are probably top of mind.
Thank you.
Yep. The last slide also said something that should resonate with everyone. If you think of RapidScale, enabling secure anywhere, anytime, and I even think we're missing a word there, or phrase, any device, right? So if you had an iPad, if you have a Mac, if you have your desktop or your laptop, or even your iPhone, for example, or Android device, you can access your corporate data and applications in a secure manner. And really, that's what this is all about. There's nothing in here. We're probably all COVIDed out and pandemiced out. I get it, but it put an injection into our business because folks need to work from home, and man, we sit right at the center of that initiative across the economy. So desktop as a service, you can get these services. Phyllis, you asked a great question. If you asked me a different question, if you asked the one that said, what's the most complex service we sell, it would be this one. And the reason being is the way that it's architected. So I often caution, sellers, don't get ahead of your skis here. Really understand what the business drivers are versus trying to get too deep on the technical side. As I mentioned earlier, you might have a Mac, or you might have some disparate systems in your organization that are legacy, and you want to utilize them more appropriately. That could be a good business driver. What is a great business driver truly is security. So for example, it mentions regulatory compliance or intellectual property protection. What if you lost your laptop? What if an employee lost a laptop? Are you worried that the data on the laptop could be compromised in any way? Desktop, that's a great driver. Do you want to buy maybe cheaper laptops and just get away with providing all the compute via the Citrix or VMware environment that's hosted in the cloud, and provide all the compute environment over the network? That's a great driver. What's not a great driver actually is and certainly COVID today being a great driver, working from anywhere and doing that securely. What's not really a great driver is, hey, I've got a refresh. I know it says on here that you're due for a refresh, and that could be a supporting and compelling event, but if you just looked at it from a TCO perspective, it will be cheaper to buy new laptops than to do desktop. It's just a more expensive solution, and there's a number of reasons why. If you just look at it at face value from a hard cost standpoint, it's more expensive. But what you end up doing is you end up simplifying the management layer and the operational layer, because you're managing every single. If I put it in this perspective, you're managing 500 folks across an enterprise. Instead of not having to go out and look at everyone's individual laptop, you're managing it all from one central console within the cloud. Much easier to do that, much easier to patch those systems, restore those systems, and just more seamlessly provide an end user experience to your internal customers. So those are great type of scenarios. I mean, going back to even security for a desktop, if you have like a USB port on your desktop, the administrator can lock it down to where you can't download anything. You can prevent antivirus and malware type things, and security becomes a massive driver, as well as I mentioned earlier, ease of management and operational efficiency. That whole BYOD, bring your own device, going to become even more compelling as we go forward here. You know, the COVID scenario and the pandemic is going to ease. I think we're all confident of that. Obviously, vaccines are imminent, but culturally, I think it's shifted our behavior. Think of Cox, for example. I can tell you that, we're not coming back to the office until June at the earliest. And even then, I think that Cox has probably, like many companies, learned that culturally, we probably need to shift. And we've probably proven to ourselves that we can be productive. I'd be surprised if we go back to 180-degree turnaround. I think most companies won't, because it'll be hard to be competitive. So you're likely going to see, hey, if you want to bring your own device, work from your house at times, work from the office at times, that's going to be more encouraged than ever. You can move on. So infrastructure as a service, I don't think we really need to spend a ton of time here. It should be fairly self-explanatory. You can see all the features there. You're just getting too technical, trying to understand vShield and VMware and ESXi hypervisors. That's really just all software, security layer software. We are a VMware shop. And if you're learning about virtualization and you went through the TLA, you've learned some of that, but you certainly don't need to get to an engineering level. I just look at it, a VM is like a file, and a VM is a virtual machine, it's a server, but really the computer gets tricked. Your physical computer's tricked to believing that file is actually a server. So you can take that file, give it its own unique operating system, give it its own processor or CPU, give it memory, and give it its own virtual disk, and it believes it's a physical server. So if you think from the economies of scale perspective, hey, I'm running all these physical servers, I can get rid of all those. I can now run all these virtual servers in a far more condensed environment. Again, ease of management, getting economies of scale. And while virtualization is certainly mainstream today, one of the reasons why it became so popular was because these computers, if you think about like Intel, for example, you think about Murphy's Law, and they just keep doubling capacity. What is it, every 8-10 months, something of that nature. But you get the point. And what's happening is while these computers are getting faster, we're not using the capabilities of the computers. So but with virtualization, you can then maximize the capacity and the true horsepower behind the physical environment in a more efficient way. And when you start doing the TCO and thinking of it from a financial perspective, it makes a lot more sense. So, that's really what started driving us towards these types of environments, was the redundancy that it should offer. And you notice, OpEx versus CapEx always comes into these discussions. Any questions? And there are no, if you truly are sitting on this call and you're like, I really don't know this stuff. I have a question. I'm afraid I'm going to look silly. Ask anything you want and I'll do my best to answer it, please. So disaster recovery as a service, this is a growing and significant marketplace. There are Gartner, this is a category that Gartner does track Magic Quadrant participants. We are not one of them. Our services here, I will tell you, I've worked for companies that are in the Magic Quadrant, most notably TierPoint, and was there when we built out our initial DR practice. The practice that we have here today is very, very similar to what they're doing with a few nuances, but from a best practices standpoint, there's nothing that is providing us a disadvantage. Everything's best of breed. We rely heavily on a technology powered by Zerto, which is again software that allows for replication from the source. If you think of the source being my production environment. So if I'm Acme Corporation and I have my production servers in my own data center, my own 4 walls, I could replicate those servers basically in near real time to a RapidScale data center, basically of your choosing. Furthermore, if I had my production environment with a competitor, I'm not with RapidScale, I might be with Flexential, or I might actually have my servers up in Amazon Cloud. You could replicate those servers to a RapidScale target. And then lastly, if you had production with us in one of our data centers, we could then replicate it to another data center within the RapidScale portfolio. So a lot of flexibility. It opens up new opportunities with customers where we may not have production type opportunities. And when I think of production, I'm thinking, your core apps that run your business. So DR as a service, huge opportunity for growth here in a market that is to take advantage of. Why? You might say, well, why? It's risk mitigation, right? If you're a company today that has any type of disaster, more and more of your data is online. It's hard to recoup and actually survive. But if you're down for 2 or 3 days, most organizations with online presence, they can't function any further. And 10 years ago, the DR consisted of backing up data to actual physical like tape media. And then you would Iron Mountain, if you remember the Iron Mountain trucks, you might have seen those. They'd come to your location, they'd pick up the tape media, and maybe you store it either in an offsite vault somewhere, or they'd run it to a company called like SunGuard. And that would sit and you would rent space on or capacity on these big like mainframe computers with the hope that if you brought the tapes back, some of the data would be there, and you paid almost like a restoration fee that was incredibly expensive. So the reason I bring this up, it was archaic, the fail rate was high, and it was very limited, mostly the enterprise type organizations. And today, DR is far less expensive, and which is a great thing, and it's a lot easier to manage, and the fail rate's incredibly low. You might hear terms like RTO, which is recovery time objective, which means how long can I afford to be down, right? If I had an outage, well, can I afford to be down a day, a couple hours? And then recovery point objective. That's how much data could I actually lose? Could I lose, a couple hours worth of data? Could I lose? And there's different ways to measure that, but really, at what point do I want to get the data back? And typically, your RPO is going to be pretty low. Targets for us would be 2 hours versus a recovery time objective of about 4 hours, which is pretty unbelievable. Any questions? Nope. So disaster recovery as a service, it's really important to understand it's very different than backups. If you want to declare a disaster and actually turn on your DR plan and say, you know what, I'm no longer running my production environment in data center A. I now want to run production at a data center B. And while it's a lot easier than it used to be, as I just explained, there's inherent risk. It's also hard to fail back. It's not an easy process. And there's network type considerations, including like data propagation. Now you're moving to a new IP range. And because of these things, you only would do that in the event that you really had to, meaning like, hey, I just had a natural disaster or my system environment completely crashed and I have absolutely no choice. I've got to declare a disaster and go to that secondary environment to run my business. Backup of a service is very different. Backups are saying, hey, I'm going to back up at the file level or the database level. And I'm going to back up and backdate up in certain increments or a certain frequency that maybe is every hour. Maybe that's every 6 hours, maybe it's every 12, maybe it's every day. And the smaller those increments and usually that's driven by the rate of change, meaning if data is highly dynamic and you have this database that keeps changing, you may want to go ahead and track and back up those changes with a higher level, a higher frequency. But when you do that, you increase your costs because you're just backing up more. And the thing about backups is, hey, I'm sure I might be making a Captain Obvious statement here, but with a backup, I can say, I want to restore this backup or this file or this database. And depending on the size of the file or database, it usually is a pretty quick process and something that's fairly seamless. Where these environments, you can back up to, obviously, the data center environment. You actually, with Veeam, which is the technology that we use a lot for backups, you also can back up to what's known as the Veeam Cloud. And again, you don't have to have a production environment with RapidScale. We could back up from wherever the customer's data is actually sitting. Security as a service. This is broad conceptually. It's when you think of security as a service, this isn't like I went and bought security as a service through RapidScale. It's a combination of a number of different offerings, including things like, you guys have all heard of Mimecast. Mimecast offers a number of value-added services, but security is at the forefront of it. The number one way to get into an organization, and I get them here every day. I get an email that says, hey, you know what? I got one yesterday that said, hey, this is Chase Bank, which I'm not a member of Chase Bank, but it said, this is Chase Bank. It's very important that you change your PIN number immediately. Number one, I'm not a member of Chase Bank. Number two, no bank is ever going to send you an email asking that. That will never happen. But I think we would all agree that there's folks out there that just don't understand that, and they'd click on that and see what let's say I was a member of Chase Bank. They're just betting that it's a numbers game. If I send that out to thousands of people, a few are going to click on it, and once I do, I'm exposed, and I'm into your environment. Mimecast helps mitigate things of that nature. But outside of email, you also have things to consider like unified management and understanding how to protect the overall network. Obviously, basic firewalls. I think that's what we think about a lot is, hey, how do I protect not only the things that are online, but how do I protect, at the perimeter, meaning, at my office locations and corporate environment. And then looking at things like log monitoring and what a log monitor would do, if you're not familiar with that term, is tracking the changes in accessibility into your environment. So if something were to happen, you actually can go back and say, okay, this is the time, the date stamp, and what actually occurred, who did it, and there's some kind of compliance component to that. You guys probably have heard of denial of service attacks too, right? Or what's known as a DDoS attack. We have offerings that can help mitigate those type of threats. So, again, there's a lot of things that RapidScale does within the security practice that maybe aren't as known widely. It's more of a discussion around, hey, what's your security posture and where are the risks? And we have some type of service in most cases, especially in the mid-market, where we can help customers address them. Okay. I'm guessing that most folks are certainly very, very educated by now on SD-WAN. And I think that one of the things I would ask you to keep in mind from a RapidScale perspective is that and this is especially in the channel. This is the best of both worlds. We have the ability to sell our network and footprint, and then offer SD-WAN services. We also have the ability to go out of network, and we go out of network and we're managing that SD-WAN device. We're like an MSP. We are a CSP, but a CSP is a cloud service provider versus a managed service provider. We'll take first call from the customer, and if that's AT&T network they're riding, we can help escalate and troubleshoot on that AT&T network on behalf of the client. And then if for some reason the customer wanted to change out the underlying network and the network that they're riding over, they don't have to change the SD-WAN provider. And when you do go to one of the larger telcos and you lock in, that is a disadvantage to the customer, because hey, look, I went to Windstream, I bought Velo through them, and I'm on Windstream's network, and I now have Windstream for SD-WAN. A little bit of a disadvantage where we can play a little bit more agnostic in those out of footprint type scenarios. So a big advantage from that standpoint. The other thing I would say is that you may have been, and I'm guessing this is the case because you think about network all the time. You may have been coached and trained through your career to think about, hey, what are the number of locations do you have? What are the, what's what's the size of the network endpoints, and things that come top of mind that are absolutely important. The RapidScale side, we take it a little bit to a different perspective. While we want to understand all that, we want to understand what applications the customer's running. We really want to understand, what does the cloud environment look like, not just from RapidScale standpoint, but are they using Salesforce.com, for example? What's the value of video versus, just regular text? What's the value of voice, and what's the prioritization look like? And where's the source and where is it coming from, so that we can architect the most efficient solution. Oh yeah, Microsoft 365. This is, in the channel, there's not a ton of folks who offer this. And I would say this, Microsoft Office 365, where from a business perspective, SD-WAN has a really rich margin. I'll give you an example. We actually CapEx those devices, meaning we buy them, they're ours, and then it's almost like, an OpEx model. Almost, I don't think of it as a lease, but you can think of it for all intents and purposes as one. Obviously, it's monthly recurring. But because of that and the way that we manage the balance sheet, that's a more profitable, one of the more profitable services for us, right? Where Office 365 has a license fee associated with it. And if you buy 5, Microsoft Office 365 E3 licenses from RapidScale, the cost to us per unit doesn't change if you buy 100 or 1,000 or 2,000. So a lot of customers might say, well, I'm looking for a volume discount. It just doesn't work that way. Our costs are linear and don't change. And that's not a disadvantage to RapidScale. That's how Microsoft works. They've created a pretty nice playing field in their favor. And obviously, it's practically a monopoly at this point. That being said, we do commission on it to the channel community, and it's not full comp. Obviously, there's a reduced commission. However, many folks won't even do that. And the reason why we're able to do it is because of the management. And we don't want to just sell the license. You can get the license anywhere. There are Microsoft CSPs, that's what they refer them to, all over the planet. And you can go to CEW, Ingram Micro, anybody and their brother can get authorized to sell Microsoft Office 365. But not everybody can take first call support and manage it and actually help you service it and back it up, and really provide the guidance and certainly do the migration, because it can be incredibly complex. Typically, there's an Active Directory component with these solutions. So while it's a little bit in the marketplace seen as a commodity, there's not a ton of margin in it. It is actually a relatively complex solution, especially when you have more than 50 plus users. You're definitely getting into an Active Directory domain type scenario. So we're a leader in this space. We've grown the business tremendously. Love to sell it because it also has the pull-through opportunity for other services. And, we should be pretty bullish about it in the channel. I will say another comment on Microsoft Office 365. What we're doing right now, we're working on Teams. I will tell you that in January of this year, while I was functional within Teams, I'm gonna go on a limb and say I wasn't alone here. I certainly was far from an expert, and the pandemic made Teams an everyday part of my life. And Microsoft Office 365, Microsoft has certainly leveraged that to their advantage. RapidScale's leveraged it to their advantage. And when you think of Microsoft 365, just don't think of Exchange. Don't think of email. That's just one component. It's the documents with OneDrive, the integration to SharePoint, obviously the Office suite, et cetera, where there's really a really powerful tool. You hear a lot about Zoom, and Zoom's done some really great things. Their business has exploded. However, today, Microsoft 365 is a better fit for the enterprise than Zoom would be. This is probably one that I'm gonna cover really at a high level. Identity of a service is complex. If you think about it in layman's terms, think about an organization who's got 100 employees, and they do have disparate systems. And they have, I'll put this back to our world. Maybe I'm trying to access Salesforce. Maybe I'm trying to access the Cox intranet in Cox One, or any other type of file server or infrastructure that I have credentials for authentication. Identity as a service allows for multi-factor authentication and single sign-on, so that you don't have to log in to multiple portals with multiple passwords. It's a unified, very secure way to authenticate your users' environment onto multiple platforms, and is something we don't sell necessarily just standalone, but something that is going to grow. If you think about work from home, everyone now is working from home, and everyone is working on disparate devices, as we've discussed. They're accessing a heterogeneous environment, whether it's the corporate environment or cloud environment, from alternative devices that might even be their own. Well, how do you do that securely? Identity as a service really helps with making that all possible without introducing a tremendous amount of risk. This is coming out soon. I think our pilot is scheduled to launch December 7th, with really the ability to sell this by mid-December, and certainly at the turn of the year, right? Managed device as a service. I have not sold one of these deals, so I couldn't give you the entire experience just yet. However, I'm bullish on the market opportunity. And, obviously we've talked about desktops, but what are those organizations go, you know what? I really don't want to mess with this stuff. I need these computers, physical, these laptops with these operating systems, with these apps installed, and I want to OpEx everything. RapidScale, I'll buy these, which we're coming out with multiple flavors. It could be tablets, it could be laptops. They're going to buy them from us. We lease them back to the customer. We cover everything from if it's damaged, if it's not working, support to the customer. So really think that that's going to take us to another level. And again, it falls back into, we look a lot like an MSP, and really make this very easy for the customer. Hey, there you go. I shot through this in 40 minutes. We fielded a couple questions. Happy to answer, at least attempt to answer anything you guys might have.
Hey, Bob, I got a quick question for you.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I had to step away for a second. So if you answered this, please forgive me. But when we're looking at the agents and what agents we're working with, which ones would you say that you have found that is adapts well with this, that probably does send more leads in, so that way we know who to go look at?
Yeah, I mean, the training wasn't set up for that, but that's actually as valuable or more valuable than the product type stuff is. That's why I mentioned at the beginning, hey, look, we're not going to get off this phone call and say, look, I can take this and make every agent an active seller. The hope was that this is either a reinforcement and a good start, but that's an excellent question. Just like I look to profile the customer that we believe would be a good fit, I really like to profile the partner that I think would be a really good fit. So you either have partners that are actively like selling cloud or some version of cloud today. And that's a really good question. Have you sold a cloud today? And a lot of them say yes. And then I typically would say, well, who, right? Who? And if it's something like a rack space or, a tier point, expedient, I start to go, okay, well, these guys understand like what we're doing. And they might say Evolve IP or something like that. We go, okay, they understand what we're doing, and that's a good start. And if they're selling them, they probably can sell us, and we can talk about that. Many cases you're gonna find they're not selling it, and they might think of cloud, and they might think of UCaaS or CCaaS, which is okay. When they're not selling it, I might ask them what their desire is to capitalize on these opportunities. And, in many cases they say, oh, sure, high desire. Well, what have you done? How are you doing it? And I would look at who their customers are, right? And if you have, and just being very, very honest, right? If you have partners that are selling simple cable modems and they're selling them to customers with single locations or really simple flat technology environments, and that's where they're living off of, that partner's gonna have a harder time selling this stuff. If you're talking to partners that have a history of selling to multi-locations, they're selling UCaaS, they might be selling SD-WAN or MPLS. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that the customers they're calling on are buying this. They're just not buying it from them. So how do we change the conversation and help them, enable them to actually find these opportunities? Once they say, yes, I'm really interested in doing that, and you determine they have the customer base to be able to do it, it's now then, are they willing to? Are you going to have to drag them, or are they motivated and eager? And if they are, some basic education around the services that we offer is certainly critical. But what's more important is going back to that business outcome, right? Hey, is there what technology initiatives do you have? What are the pain points? I think the COVID conversation is incredibly appropriate. And what I mean by that is if I was a partner sitting in front of a customer today and I only had a few minutes, I might ask them, hey, how's COVID impacted you? How did you respond? And what did you learn? And if you ask those three questions, you're going to get into a cloud conversation. I almost guarantee it.
Those are great. I just love that, even just for the people to say that to their agent and see what they say. So
I think we got to get into discussions with our customers about, hey, how are they adapting, and was it a short-term, strategy, and what does the long-term strategy look like, versus, hey, can I talk to you about desktop? We got to get into a little bit more of a discussion about where they're headed. How are they going to, how are they adapting to this new world? And those are business discussions that will lead to opportunities.
that's great. Hey guys, this Bob is a very busy man. So if you guys got questions, I feel privileged that he took time out to come and talk to us. But I definitely want to make sure that if you're sitting there scratching your head, like he was saying, don't feel like any question's a dumb question or a silly question. Ask him, because he will tell you.
Yeah, this is it's not easy stuff. I get it. And if you gave me your training on some of your services, I would be asking very dumb questions. I guarantee it.
Hey Bob, this is Jeff Garrett from Oklahoma.
Hey Jeff.
I got a couple questions, but first off, what sets our cloud services apart from our competition?
Hey, that is a great question. And I don't know that you got to bear with me my answer, because there is nothing that we have that says, hey, I've got intellectual property that everyone else doesn't have, right? So when I say that is that, I'll put it into this perspective. We're inside the best data centers you can possibly be inside. So is everybody else, right? They're all in tier 3 or tier 4 data centers. We're using best of breed technologies and architecting these solutions based on best practices. Most of the notable folks that we're talking to today are doing that exact same thing. So those things right there are going to be table stakes. Most folks also have the level of compliancies that we either have or that we're pursuing. So you start to get yourself at least onto a level playing field. I mentioned the intellectual property. There's a little bit of difference with what we're doing from a portal perspective, but I'll leave that on the side for just this conversation. I think the difference really comes down to really focusing in on, hey, the market that we're serving. A couple things. I kind of think of it as the underserved market. I really do. Rackspace, TierPoint, all these guys that are in this cloud space, they love to go up market, bigger. They want bigger deals, bigger customers, and they want to talk engineer to engineer and admin to admin all the time. And that generates a lot of MRR when you land these big opportunities. It definitely does. But it also introduces a tremendous amount of competition, and you're often now competing with the likes of AWS and Azure, which certainly we're susceptible to, but not at the same rate they are, because those bigger companies are adapting to those technologies at a faster pace. Transversely, they have a hard time kind of coming down market, and this is where the people piece gets into it. And actually having, instead of tier 2 and tier 3 support, where you're talking engineer to engineer or admin to admin, actually providing tier 1 support where, hey, Jeff Garrett actually calls in as a task user and has problems with PowerPoint or email, and how do they fix it? And we take those first line of calls and we do it every day, all day, and do it with a very high net promoter score. In addition, the hardest part of getting to the cloud, or the hardest part of selling cloud and making the decision to get into the cloud, is how do I get there? Customers are always like, man, I've only got 1 or 2 IT people in this kind of mid-market to SMB space. How do I actually get to the cloud? 7 out of 10 engagements, we're actually doing that work for them. We're moving the apps, we're moving the data, we're setting up the environments, and most of these folks in our competitive cohorts don't do that, or if they do, they outsource it, and it can be extremely expensive. So we take on a lot of that work on the front end. Also, a lot of these folks don't do things like SD-WAN, right? So if you think about, hey, now I've got first tier support. I take first tier from Jeff Garrett, who's the task user. I can talk admin to admin. I can talk engineer to engineer. I can do that 24/7. I can manage your applications. I can manage your desktops. And I can put SD-WAN across your enterprise. And I can provide the network if you're in footprint, but it doesn't matter. We can do type 2 or type 3. Or you can get it yourself, Mr. Customer. So at the end of the day, if you're that mid-market customer, no one else out there, except for a very small folks, maybe Evolve IP, can say, I can manage all of that. And by the time I leave, you've got nothing more than a printer that's sitting in your office. And that's where we start to look a lot like an MSP and really provide a complete IT solution from the cloud. And that's really hard to do in this sector, and that would be the key differentiator. So probably a long-winded answer to your question. I know you said you had a few, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. So, and from the cloud services standpoint, we don't technically roll trucks, right? This is all done remotely.
Correct.
So is there integration needed from an IT partner if we have a referral partner there with the customer, or how are you guys doing that if there is hands needed on site?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll answer it a couple different ways. From an SD-WAN perspective, you may or may not know this. If it's in footprint and we sold to a CB customer, for example, or even if it wasn't a CB customer, we could theoretically use our internal personnel from Cox to actually do the install. We don't typically do that because it's pretty self-sufficient, but we can. And if it's out of footprint, we do have a partner. It's Genesis based out of Atlanta that will do those SD-WAN installs. Now that's only that's narrow in scope. It's very specific to SD-WAN. We have actually, in true transparency, we've actually flirted with and piloted services where we actually put people on site. I can tell you 2 things. It just doesn't scale very well. You get a lot of scope creep. So we send Johnny technician out, for example, he's going to be there 4 hours per week, just an example. And all of a sudden, Johnny Technician, even though we said Johnny Technician is going to do X services and this is what's in scope, they got him doing everything but cleaning the coffee maker, and he can't get out of there. He's there for now 7 hours. And it all of a sudden, your cost to support that customer is going through the roof. And then when you sell that service to a second customer, it gets very difficult to recoup your money. So I think in a perfect world, we'd have folks that are in every market, especially in every one of our 11 markets, that would be able to go to the client if necessary. Typically, it's not necessary, but there are circumstances like, hey, my firewall, like broke, or something's with my switch. I need troubleshooting, and I need you to do it not remotely, or my printer broke, which we're not the printer support team, but I get it. Not a perfect world. There that is a gap, but unfortunately, I don't think the fix is very easy, and neither as our cloud cohorts fix that either. What I will tell you is I think technology and automation is going to solve that, continue to solve it over time. And the less mature customer you have, the more this is a problem, right? If you get the more mature customer you have, meaning, hey, I've got at least a couple people on site that know IT, not really an issue. When you don't have anybody, big problem.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Is there some type of vetting process? Because I know in Oklahoma, so I've done quite a bit with cloud with partners here, even though they haven't been compensated yet. But is there in some type of vetting process where we can use a referral partner for those smart hand options in our market?
We could. Now, what we wouldn't do is resell them. We would just partner with that partner. The customer would say, "Hey, this is my IT partner." They would give they would contract with them directly. They could even give them authorization to communicate with us, either in the short term or long term, for first level escalation, or even second or tertiary. So those type of arrangements can be made, and that's pretty common. What wouldn't be common is just saying, "Hey, we're gonna resell this and put them on our paper and resell it back to the customer."
Okay, gotcha. And then just kind of a last wrap-up question: is there, and I'm sure there is there bandwidth requirements for each of these services for the customer, or do they have to have fiber in place, that sort of thing?
Hey, that's a fantastic question. There are some very minimal requirements. I mean, and you're getting into a technology question that on the top of my head, I don't know the answer around desktop. I think it might be 156 kilobit is the minimum, but which is really small, right? But and that's actually like per session. But with desktops, this is where this comes into play. So if we were to sell desktop as a service, for the most part, you get into maybe you get into a rural environment. In Oklahoma, that could be very applicable. We got folks out in like Northwest Arkansas. These type of challenges come up, and you're like, "Hey, I'm going to sell desktop," and you figure out that they've got an office, and the office has got a T1 sitting there, and you're like, "Oh boy, we have a problem." And when we sell desktops, we've learned historically that some of the biggest challenges are actually the customer's WAN. Or the customer's LAN for that matter, sorry, and just understanding what the bottlenecks are so that the appropriate throughput is there to provide a clean desktop experience. So that does get vetted. To answer your question directly, the solution engineer through the discovery process will want to understand what the LAN and the WAN looks like for each client.
Okay, well, that's very helpful, and I'll stop asking questions.
No problem. No problem. No problem. Those were good ones.
Any other questions?
Good stuff.
Okay,
I love
Bob,
doing
thank
this.
you.
Yeah, so thank you for having me.
Bob, thank you very much for doing this for us. Really appreciate it. Team, I'll send out Bob's deck following getting off this call. So if there's nothing else, it looks like we have a question from JD.
So I had a question for you. I know in the past, I've gone through a lot of, like I was there when you guys first launched back when the first group that came through Orange County. Yeah. But I was wondering if for the referral partners, if you guys have an environment that we can get to kind of familiarize ourselves with a test environment, just to kind of show, because it really helps in people who haven't dealt with specifically desktop as a service. It's a really hard concept. It's an easy concept to see, but it's hard to really understand until you see it in action and actually how fast it is as far as a service. So when you're selling the value add for it, like what I mean by is everyone thinks of cloud, they think of a lot of lag. Well, the reality of it is the amount of compute that you get on the back end, you're actually loading applications twice as fast as an expensive laptop. And to show that to us and people would be very beneficial, and kind of show that, hey, this is actually the speed that it is, and this is how it works, and this is kind of showing that.
That's a great question. Have you? I got a question for you. Number one, have you seen the? Are you familiar with the portal we put in place? That's the customer portal. Have you seen that?
No, I have not. If there's any kind of like demo, I have not seen that.
Yeah, so there's not a demo that our sellers actually can grab and go, hey, I'm going to show this to like a customer, but here's what I'll offer you. And I'll leave this to maybe Jared and Don to take up. But perhaps let's get through Thanksgiving holiday, and maybe let's put a 30-minute, session out, and I'll bring in an engineer that'll actually show you, hey, when I have a desktop, this is what I do. And here's what happens actually. So they'll try to give you a visual. But if I had a Citrix session, there's two ways to get to it. It's honestly as easy as taking your browser and putting in a hyperlink, authenticating to it, and there's your desktop, and it looks just like the desktop that you're looking at today. The other way would be there's an actual like Citrix icon, and you just click, you launch that icon. Again, same thing, you authenticate to it, and you're into your Citrix session. So I will absolutely be willing to have an engineer demo that for you, because I think it's important, and we'll do some things in there that we'll go, this is what your experience would look like. And we do sit in front of a customer and do just that. And the customer's like, okay, that's pretty easy. At the same time, we've built a pretty awesome portal that allows our customers to actually go in and look at in real time, like, hey, I've got X amount of SD-WAN devices in the field, in the wild. These are the ones that are active. This one has an issue. Here's the throughput. Here's the location. In that same portal, here's my Microsoft licenses. I'm contracted for X, but you know what? I'm using more than I'm contracted for, so I'm going to get a usage fee. I can link back and see that on my invoice, right? So pretty much every services that we're doing, that all links into that customer-facing portal, and I can probably knock that out in the same session if you'd be interested.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, one of the most beneficial ads for me when I first saw it was just there was a side-by-side, a regular standard laptop, and then a little Chromebook, and then they launched Microsoft Word, and boom, Word popped up in 2.5 on the cloud version, and then the other one took time to think, and that was very beneficial to say, hey, this is why it's better, and this is what you're seeing.
I would also say that it's not all it's very fast, considering that the compute's coming from the cloud. But as I mentioned before, there's a number of elements that come into play. I get a little nervous by saying, hey, it's going to be as fast, because you've got overhead you're gonna take on, and users get somewhat particular, especially executives. And if there's ever a complaint, that usually is complaining. It's like, oh, now I got to launch this little icon, and maybe it's a little bit slower. So to your point, it's fast. It's fast. Different environments, your network. You might be sitting on a Windows 7 device, of course not a Cox, but our customers might be, and they're going, why is your VDI environment so slow, your DAS environment so slow? Your solution stinks. And we're like, oh, hold on a second. Let me look at let me dig into the actual local desktop you're accessing it from. Oh, it's a Windows 7 operating system, and you've got, like I said, a T1. Those are elements that come into play. But let's get that on the calendar. I'd be happy to do it.
Yeah, that works for me. Thank you.
All right, all. So we got to jump. It's at the top of the hour. Thanks all for joining. We will be having follow-up sessions with the referral partners, and that's going to be headed up by Bo and Dale. So Bob won't be joining us for those, but we're going to be setting that up in the near term. Don's working on that, and we'll be rolling this out to the referral channel. So good stuff all around. Appreciate you, Bob. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.